There's a book that's been sitting on bestseller lists for over 4 decades. No social media, no podcast tour, no influencer pushing it. Just word of mouth, person to person, decade after decade, because something inside it hit people in a place they couldn't explain. And it opens with 3 words: life is difficult. That's it. That's the opening line. No promise of a better morning routine. No 5 steps to your best self. No, you've got this. Just life is difficult. M. Scott Peck didn't write it for people who wanted inspiration. He wrote it because he was tired of watching people destroy themselves trying to escape something that was never going to go away. That changes everything about how you read it. This isn't a self-help book. Not really. It's a psychiatrist telling you, as gently and honestly as he can, that the thing you've been running from is the exact thing that was going to make you whole. So let's talk about what's actually in it, because the summaries you've already seen have skipped the best parts. Welcome, by the way. I know that's a lot to hit you with right at the top, but it's necessary for what we're getting into today, because our goal here isn't to hand you a superficial checklist or a toxic positivity mantra. We're looking at the real foundational architecture of what makes a fulfilling life. We're starting with the unvarnished truth of Peck's 1978 book, The Road Less Traveled. Then we're mixing those clinical insights with a modern framework, specifically a 15-year running curriculum from Stanford University called the Odyssey Plan. And then we're going to anchor all of that philosophy in actual empirical data from the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is literally the longest running study on human happiness in the history of science. And I want to be upfront with you. This whole journey requires you to be willing to be a little uncomfortable. We're going to look at how we evade responsibility, how we let our brains run on default settings, and what a century of actual data proves matters when all the noise fades. This isn't about waking up at 4 a.m. and taking ice baths to optimize your day. It's about fundamentally rewiring how you interpret reality, how you design your future, and how you connect with the world. So let's get into it. Peck starts with something he calls the responsibility trap, and he has this really stark observation about human behavior. Basically, whenever something difficult happens, a failure, a conflict, a sudden change, every single one of us immediately plots ourselves somewhere on a spectrum. On one extreme, you have the neurotics. They instantly internalize the fault. They assume they are the root cause of whatever suffering is happening. They take on way too much. On the other extreme, you have what Peck calls character-disordered individuals. They immediately look outward. It's the economy, it's their spouse, it's their boss. Childhood trauma, zero ownership whatsoever. And honestly, most of us slide back and forth along that spectrum, depending on the day, depending on how stressed we are. But what Peck is doing here, he isn't just labeling people to make them feel bad. He's trying to correct a huge cultural misunderstanding about what the word responsibility actually means. We think of it as blame. We completely conflate the two, but blame is backward looking. It's about assigning guilt for something in the past. Responsibility, at least in the psychiatric sense, is forward-looking. It's literally the ability to respond. It's about reclaiming your agency. So when you look at a bad situation and you say, I'm stuck because of my industry, or I am this way because of my parents, you might feel a temporary wave of relief. You offloaded the blame, but the hidden cost is massive. You basically hand the external world the keys to your personal growth. By declaring yourself a victim of circumstance, you make yourself entirely powerless to actually change the circumstance. It's an ego defense mechanism. It feels so much better in the moment to say traffic made me late, rather than I just didn't leave early enough. And there's a story from Peck's clinical practice that completely illustrates this. The story of his patient John. John was complaining relentlessly about his commute to therapy. He tells Peck, I take this shortcut and it saves me 5 minutes, but the drive is still just terrible. Most therapists would pivot back to his childhood or say, tell me how that makes you feel. But Peck stops the session. He literally tells John to get up off the couch. He refuses to analyze the story. He demands to test it in the physical world. So they go out to the parking lot. Peck gets in the passenger seat. John gets in the driver's seat. Peck brings a notepad and a stopwatch. They drive John's usual route and time it. Then they drive the so-called shortcut, and the reality completely shatters John's narrative. The shortcut wasn't saving him time at all. It was costing him 10 minutes every single day. He was literally losing time on his own shortcut. Now we have to pause and ask the real psychological question. Why? Why fabricate a reality about something as trivial as a commute? Why defend a shortcut that is mathematically making your life worse? The best way I can explain it is with a corrupted GPS. Imagine you have a GPS in your car, but you haven't updated it since 2015. You're driving and the GPS tells you to turn left onto a bridge. But that bridge was demolished 3 years ago. If you blindly trust the corrupted map, your car goes straight into the river. And if you don't update your internal map of reality, because admitting you were wrong about the shortcut feels like a tiny blow to your ego, you are navigating your entire life using corrupted data. This is what Peck calls a dedication to truth. We build our maps of reality when we're young, mostly based on early experiences, but the world changes, our environments change, we change. The map gets outdated. Maintaining an accurate map requires constant, painful revision, because admitting that your shortcut is taking longer requires you to say out loud, I was wrong. I made a poor calculation, and to a fragile ego, I was wrong feels like a psychological death. So the brain would literally rather distort reality to protect the ego than accept the truth and update the map. Now, John's commute is relatively harmless, it's just 10 lost minutes, but as you go deeper into Peck's work, this refusal to update the map takes a really dark turn. Because when the ego's need to protect itself overrides the reality of an actual severe crisis, the consequences are catastrophic. And I'm talking about the story of a teenage boy named Bobby. Bobby was experiencing severe depression, actively suicidal. His parents were aware of how much he was deteriorating. But to actually acknowledge his state, to update their map of reality, to include the fact that their son was in a life-threatening psychiatric crisis, that would require them to look in the mirror and ask, what is happening in our home? How are we contributing to this? What do we need to do? And they were terrified of that, so they chose denial. They refused to get him help. They pretended the old map was still accurate. But here's where it gets truly chilling. Christmas comes around, and these parents, who are actively avoiding the reality of their deeply depressed son, decide to give him a major gift. They wrap up a .22 caliber rifle, a gift he had not asked for, a gift he had shown zero interest in. And it wasn't just any rifle. It was the exact same type of weapon that Bobby's older brother had previously used to commit suicide. Peck calls this unconscious betrayal, because these parents were not consciously plotting anything. They probably told themselves they were just giving a normal teenage boy a normal gift. But the unconscious mind is incredibly powerful. It always seeks expression, because they couldn't face the agony of their own responsibility, because they couldn't speak the truth that their surviving son needed drastic help. Their unconscious actions spoke the truth for them. The unspoken psychological message delivered to Bobby as he unwrapped that rifle was this: we cannot deal with your pain. Take your brother's weapon. Do what he did. You deserve to die. That is the ultimate consequence of living with a corrupted map. They protected their own egos. They avoided the discomfort of getting help. And in doing so, they handed their child a death sentence. The lies we tell ourselves aren't just quirky little habits. When we refuse to accept responsibility, those lies become a blast radius that takes down everyone around us, which is exactly why Peck is so adamant that life is difficult. Updating the map is an agonizing process. You have to constantly grieve your old worldview. It takes immense discipline to look at your life, realize you're driving toward a cliff, and have the courage to actually grab the steering wheel. But here's the danger. Say you do the hard work. You look at your map, you realize it's corrupted, and you realize you're on a path you don't want to be on. The immediate emotional response for most people is panic. You feel completely trapped. You think, okay, I'm on the wrong road, but I have a mortgage, I have kids, I've got a decade invested in this career. I literally have no other options, and that paralyzed state is exactly where most people get stuck. So if you want to know whether your map is accurate, you have to look objectively at where it's taking you, and you have to learn how to change direction without blowing up your entire life. That's where we move from the psychiatric clinic to the design studio, specifically Stanford University's design school. Professors Bill Burnett and Dave Evans took the principles of product design, how engineers build and test new technology, and applied them to human life. They created a curriculum called Designing Your Life, and out of that came what's known as the Odyssey Plan. The core of this plan relies on 3 confronting questions, and if you're listening to this right now, I want you to treat this as a personal audit. Here is the first question of the Odyssey Plan. How will your life look if you stay on your current path? The phrasing is deliberate. It's scientifically grounded. It doesn't ask for your fantasy. It's asking, if absolutely nothing changes, if you stay in your current job, keep your current apartment, your exact friend group, your current diet, your morning routine, if everything stays static, where does this trajectory lead you in exactly 5 years? The brilliance of starting there is that it attacks the cognitive bias of the autopilot. The human brain, specifically regions like the basal ganglia, is a prediction machine. It's built for efficiency. It wants to conserve metabolic energy, so it automates our routines. It wires us to seek the path of least resistance. The autopilot is purely biological. The problem is that modern self-help culture tells us to fight this by visualizing our ultimate dream life. The yacht, the millions, the perfect body. But Burnett and Evans know that visualizing a distant fantasy doesn't actually motivate change. It just makes you feel bad about your current life. It creates a gap of disappointment. Instead, they force you to visualize your default life. And the harsh psychological truth of the default life is that things rarely stay the same. If you are coasting, you are usually declining. Let me put some visceral imagery to this. What does that default trajectory actually look like? Say you're currently carrying an extra 40 pounds. It's not the end of the world, but your knees ache a bit. You keep telling yourself you'll get back to the gym when work slows down, but those dumbbells in the basement have been gathering dust for 2 years. If nothing changes, what does your health look like in 5 years? It's not 40 pounds anymore, it's 60. It's pre-diabetes, it compounds. Or consider your career. You're in a job that drains your life force. You dread Mondays. You're secretly terrified that AI is going to replace your department in 3 years, but you aren't spending any time upskilling. Where are you in 5 years? Unemployed and irrelevant, or surviving on 15 cups of coffee a day, grinding your teeth to nubs from stress? Or, and I think this one hits close to home for a lot of people, you're staying in a romantic relationship simply because the person is nice. No abuse, no massive drama, but zero spark. You just sort of slid into signing a lease together because it made financial sense. What does that look like in 5 years? Resentment, total soul-crushing boredom. That is the terrifying reality of passive momentum. You don't actively choose to ruin your life. You just fail to steer. Mel Robbins introduces a concept here that deeply resonated with me: unfinished business. She shares this story about a friend she's known for 30 years. He's 56 years old. And by all external metrics, he won the game. Highly lucrative career in tech and commercial real estate, but he reached a breaking point. And he told her, "I have unfinished business with myself." He realized he had spent decades suppressing his core desire, which was music. He needed to make music the central pillar of his life before he died. That phrase is haunting. Unfinished business. Because it implies a debt. A psychological debt you owe to your own potential. If your current path ignores the things that make you feel genuinely alive, that unfinished business doesn't quietly fade away. It rots under the floorboards. The cognitive load of suppressing your true desires requires immense energy. It pops up as midlife crises, sudden bouts of depression, or even chronic physical ailments. James Clear puts it beautifully when he says, "Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Every action is a vote. When you hit snooze instead of walking the dog, that's a vote. When you stay quiet in the meeting instead of pitching your idea, that's a vote. Are you happy with the candidate you are voting into office right now? Because the current path you're on is the leading indicator of exactly who you will be. If the map of your daily habits is leading to a version of yourself that you resent, you have to break the autopilot. But this brings us right back to the panic we talked about earlier. You look at the default path. you realize it's leading to misery. But your brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, flares up. You look at your job, your mortgage, your kids, and you tell yourself, I am trapped, I cannot change course. And this is a complete cognitive distortion, which brings us to the ultimate cognitive hack of the Odyssey Plan. Question number 2. And this one is designed specifically to shatter the illusion that you are trapped. Here it is. If the path you are currently on disappeared tomorrow, what would you do? This is the rug pull. And if you're listening to this on your commute right now, your heart rate probably just spiked. You're thinking, I have a mortgage, I have kids, I can't just pretend my job disappeared. That's a disaster. But we have to look at the neurobiology of why this question is so incredibly effective. Under normal circumstances, we only engage in Plan B thinking during an actual trauma response. You get laid off on a Tuesday. Your partner unexpectedly packs their bags and leaves. A macroeconomic crisis wipes out your entire industry. When that happens in reality, your nervous system is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. You enter a state of acute stress. And in that state, your prefrontal cortex, the evolutionary newest part of the brain, responsible for logic, executive function, and creative problem solving, it gets hijacked. It shuts down. You freeze. You grieve. You panic. You cannot think creatively when you're running from a tiger. You're just trying to survive the next 10 minutes. But Burnett and Evans are asking you to run this simulation now, while you're safely sitting in your living room, while Plan A is still entirely intact. By forcing yourself to imagine the disappearance of your current path while your nervous system is calm, you strip the fear away. You unlock the brain's massive capacity for problem solving without the paralyzing adrenaline of an actual crisis. You prove to your own brain that you have agility. It's like exposure therapy for your career and your life. And when you look at real-world examples of people doing this, it's incredibly expansive. Take a professional dancer. Her entire identity, her social circle, her income, everything was tied to her physical ability to perform. Then she suffers a catastrophic, career-ending injury. If she hadn't thought about this beforehand, that's the kind of trauma that destroys a person. But she had a plan B. Her pivot wasn't to abandon her love of movement. She pivoted to teaching dance to at-risk kids at community centers. She kept the intrinsic passion, but changed the vehicle. Or consider a mid-level corporate marketer, totally blindsided by a restructuring, laid off with zero warning. Instead of spiraling into panic and blasting out 500 identical resumes to jobs he hated, he realized his plan B was to start freelancing, specifically helping local small businesses with their digital presence. He ended up running a highly lucrative boutique consulting firm. And here's what's really crucial to understand. Everything they were doing in Plan A was secretly preparing them for Plan B. There's a concept around finding purpose through sampling. The theory is that we collect diverse experiences, skills, and micro-competencies even in the jobs we absolutely despise. The marketer hated corporate bureaucracy, but he learned how to run enterprise-level campaigns, which made him invaluable to a local bakery. Everything you are doing right now is putting tools in a toolbox that you can carry into your Plan B. Mel Robbins actually walked through her own Plan B brainstorm, and it was fascinating. She has built a massive media empire, but she asked herself the rug pull question. If the podcast industry collapsed, if the speaking gigs dried up, what would she do? She didn't say she'd give up. She realized she had options, which beautifully illustrates that the options are always there. They're just buried under the noise, the ego, and the daily obligations of Plan A. But I want to pause here because there is a bizarre flaw in human psychology worth naming. Think about your best friend. If your best friend calls you crying and says, I just got fired, my life is over, you don't panic. You can instantly list 5 brilliant, viable career pivots for them. You can see their potential with crystal clarity. But when it happens to us, we put on massive blinders. We convince ourselves we have literally zero options. Why can we solve everyone else's life but our own? It circles us directly back to Peck. It has everything to do with the terror of identity loss, specifically what Peck calls the discarding of old tapes. He illustrates this through a patient named Heather. Heather was caught in a destructive pattern of relating to men, driven by childhood trauma. To heal, she essentially had to erase the old neurological tape and record an entirely new way of interacting with the world. Discarding an old tape is terrifying, because it constitutes a loss of self. It's like trying to run modern software on a computer that's still running Windows 95. The hardware panics. It doesn't have the drivers for the new reality. Your brain is the hardware running the Windows 95 operating system. The operating system is your current identity, your job title, your relationship status, your daily routine. Even if that operating system is slow, prone to crashing, and making you miserable, your brain knows exactly where all the bugs are. It is predictable, and the human brain is a prediction machine. Unpredictability equals danger. So when you look at your own life and try to imagine a massive pivot, your brain's threat detection system screams danger. We don't have the code for this. It deliberately blinds you to options to keep you safe in the familiar misery. But when you look at your friend's life, your amygdala isn't triggered, your survival isn't on the line. So your prefrontal cortex is fully engaged and you can see their options objectively. The Odyssey Plan's Plan B exercise is designed to bypass your own amygdala by making the pivot a theoretical game rather than an immediate threat. We cling to the misery we know rather than risk the mystery we don't. That's a tough pill to swallow, but it makes total sense. So we've looked at the grim reality of the default path. We've done the crisis planning, the rug pull, to prove to our brains that we won't die if things change. Now the Odyssey Plan transitions from mitigating fear to unlocking real possibility. Once the fear loses its grip, what is actually possible? And this brings us to the third and final question. How would your life look if there was absolutely nothing holding you back? This is the ultimate swing for the fences. I want you to actively construct this in your mind right now. I'm taking away every single constraint. You have unlimited money. Your parents have no expectations of you. Your spouse is totally supportive of whatever you choose. Society isn't judging you. If absolutely nothing was holding you back, what would your Tuesday look like? And this is not just an exercise in idle daydreaming. It serves a highly specific psychological function. From birth, we are conditioned by extrinsic motivators. We chase status, wealth, prestigious job titles, the approval of our peers. These are extrinsic traps. This question is a surgical tool designed to bypass those traps and reconnect you with your intrinsic values, and there is compelling empirical research backing up why this matters. Consider the 2015 study conducted at Knox College by psychologist Tim Kasser. His research focused on the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic goals. He tracked individuals over time and found a definitive correlation. When people organized their lives around extrinsic values, chasing external validation, accumulating wealth for the sake of image, seeking fame or status, they reported significantly higher levels of anxiety, depression, and overall life dissatisfaction. However, when people focused on intrinsic values, things like personal growth, meaningful contribution to their community, and deep interpersonal connections, their baseline anxiety dropped and their life satisfaction spiked. Asking what you would do if money and judgment vanished forces your brain to identify your intrinsic desires. But let's be real. When people hear this question, the first thing they say is, well, money is holding me back. We use money as the ultimate scapegoat, but the truth is, the biggest barrier isn't the bank account. The biggest barrier is other people's opinions. The single heaviest anchor holding us to a miserable path is the paralyzing fear of being misunderstood, or the fear of disappointing people who have a vested interest in the old version of us. We spend staggering amounts of cognitive energy managing other people's feelings about our life choices. It is exhausting. The let them theory is the radical psychological act of dropping that weight. You have to literally say, let people misunderstand me. Let my parents be disappointed that I don't want to climb the corporate ladder anymore. Let my friends think I'm crazy for wanting to open a bookstore. You have to reclaim that cognitive load. If you are spending 40% of your mental energy managing the optics of your life, you only have 60% left to actually live it. And the freedom that comes from dropping that load is incredible. There's a beautifully specific story of a guy named Henry who did this exact exercise. Henry sat down and asked himself what his life would look like with zero limitations. Notice what he didn't write. He didn't write down billionaire tech CEO with a yacht in Monaco. He wrote down that his ultimate dream was to own a beautiful, sprawling old farmhouse. He wanted it filled with rescue cats, and he wanted every single cat named after a classic movie star. He wanted a massive 86-inch television in the living room, and this is the best part. He wanted a commercial vending machine installed in his house that dispenses never-ending free Italian ice. It sounds absurd on the surface, but from a psychological standpoint, it is profoundly authentic. It's so wildly specific to him. It reveals his deep intrinsic desire for comfort, quirkiness, solitude, and simple unpretentious joy. Mel Robbins shared her own version of this too. Years ago, she was at the absolute peak of her career by external metrics, making a fantastic living, traveling 150 days a year, keynoting massive corporate events for Microsoft, JP Morgan, you name it. From the outside, she was crushing it, but internally, she was suffering. She had unfinished business. When she stripped away the money and the expectations of the speaking circuit, she realized she hated living in airports. She hated the sterile hotel rooms. Her unhindered intrinsic dream was to simply sit in a studio in Boston, close to her family, and just talk to people. That realization birthed her podcast. But here is where the Stanford methodology separates itself from traditional manifestation or self-help. Dreaming is only the diagnostic phase. Once you identify the intrinsic dream, you don't just create a vision board and hope the universe delivers it. You transition from philosophy to engineering. Burnett and Evans teach their students how to translate wild, unhindered dreams into reality using a concept called prototyping. Prototyping is simply running a low-stakes, low-cost behavioral experiment. You do not blow up your life. You do not quit your stable job on a random Tuesday, drain your 401k, and move to Bali to become a yoga instructor. That is a recipe for a crisis, not a transition. Instead, you find a tiny, manageable way to test the waters of your dream. You're gathering empirical data to see if the reality of the dream actually matches the fantasy in your head. Take Mel's husband, Chris. Chris runs a men's retreat. He's a death doula, but he realized he had unfinished business. He wanted to write a book. He didn't know what the plot was. He didn't have a publisher. He just had this deep intrinsic pull to be a writer. So what was his prototype? He didn't quit his job and rent a cabin in the woods. He just started waking up at 5:15 a.m. He would meditate and then write for exactly 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes. Then he'd get up, take the dogs for a walk, and go about his normal day. The brilliance of the 15-minute prototype is that it bypasses the amygdala's fear response. 15 minutes isn't threatening, but more importantly, it signals a profound shift in identity. By sitting down every single morning, he is giving his brain empirical evidence that he is no longer someone who merely wants to write. He is fundamentally someone who writes. But prototyping also serves another, arguably more important function. It saves you from destroying your life pursuing the wrong dream entirely. The bakery story is the ultimate cautionary tale. Mel talks about how for years she harbored this idyllic fantasy of owning a bakery. We all know the fantasy. The quaint storefront, the little bell chiming when customers walk in, the warm smell of fresh sourdough, wearing a cute apron. It was her escape fantasy. So she decided to prototype it. Instead of taking out a massive small business loan and signing a commercial lease, she simply got a job working behind the counter at a local bakery, a zero-risk data-gathering mission. And it took exactly 2 shifts for the fantasy to shatter. 2 shifts of her alarm going off at 4:30 in the morning in the freezing cold. 2 shifts of hauling heavy bags of flour, scrubbing industrial equipment, dealing with cranky morning customers, and coming home exhausted, smelling permanently like a giant stale carrot muffin. The empirical data came back immediately. She didn't want the brutal reality of running a bakery. She just liked the aesthetic experience of going to one. That is the immense power of the prototype. It provides immediate, unfiltered feedback. It prevents you from investing your life savings, your marriage, and your mental health into an illusion. Another brilliant zero-cost prototype is what we can call the Montana test. Say your unhindered dream is to leave the rat race of the city and move out west to Montana. You've been watching entirely too many episodes of Yellowstone, you bought a cowboy hat, and you are convinced you need a ranch. Before you call a realtor and sell your house, you prototype it. If you can't even afford a flight, use technology. Open Google Maps, drop the little yellow Street View icon right into the middle of the town you're obsessing over, and virtually cruise around. Click down Main Street, look at the grocery store, look at the surrounding landscape. You might suddenly realize the town is literally 2 blocks long. The nearest hospital is a 2-hour drive away. There is no coffee shop, and it looks absolutely nothing like a Kevin Costner television set. It brings the dream down from the clouds and subjects it to gravity. So if we synthesize the entire Stanford Odyssey process, here is what it looks like. First, you look honestly at your default path and admit where the autopilot is taking you. Second, you mitigate the biological terror of change by defining your plan B, proving to your brain that you can survive a pivot. Third, you bypass extrinsic traps and reconnect with your intrinsic desires by dreaming without limitations. And finally, you use low-stakes empirical prototypes to inch your way toward that new reality safely. It's a phenomenal, actionable system. But stepping back, we have to ask a much larger question. We are putting you through the ringer here. We are asking you to undergo the painful truth-telling and map updating of M. Scott Peck. We are asking you to relentlessly audit your life and run disciplined prototypes using the Stanford model. Why? What is the actual tangible end goal of all this effort? The overarching goal, ostensibly, is to achieve what philosophers have called the good life. But the good life is a highly subjective, historically nebulous term. What does it actually mean? Is it wealth? Is it legacy? Is it inner peace? This is where we bring in the heavy artillery. We are not going to rely on philosophical musings or poetic interpretations. We are going to look at what empirical science says a good life actually is, and there is no more robust, comprehensive data set in the history of human science than the Harvard study of adult development, currently directed by Dr. Robert Waldinger. The scale, ambition, and rigor of this study are difficult to overstate. It is an 86-year longitudinal study. It began in 1938. FDR was in the White House. The United States hadn't even entered World War II yet, and the methodology of how they selected their subjects is what makes the data so bulletproof. They didn't just study one demographic. They tracked 2 vastly different cohorts of young men to control for socioeconomic variables. The first cohort consisted of 268 Harvard University sophomores, a group representing elite privilege, high education, and massive advantage. A group that astonishingly included the future President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. But the second group is the complete antithesis. Simultaneously, they tracked 456 inner-city youth drawn from some of Boston's poorest, most disadvantaged, most marginalized neighborhoods. Boys growing up in tenements without running water, facing severe systemic hurdles. And bizarrely, this cohort included the man who would later become known as the Boston Strangler. So you have the ultimate spectrum of human potential, a future president and a future serial killer, and hundreds of ordinary lives in between. And the methodology was relentless. They didn't just mail out a questionnaire every 5 years and ask, "Are you happy?" They conducted rigorous, invasive research. They subjected these men to exhaustive medical exams. They drew blood. They scanned their brains as technology evolved. They conducted deep, hours-long psychiatric interviews. The researchers physically went into their childhood homes to interview their parents and grandparents. They took meticulous notes on the disciplinary styles used in the home, the emotional climate of the marriage. They literally recorded what the families were eating for dinner in 1938 to track nutritional impact. And then they followed these men, and eventually their spouses, and now their children, for their entire lives. Through adolescence, the trauma of World War II, the boom of the 50s, midlife crisis, old age, cognitive decline, and ultimately death. It is the ultimate scientific attempt to answer the question, what makes a human being thrive? They had nearly a century of data, mountains of medical records, thousands of pages of interviews. And the findings, the ultimate revelation of an 86-year multi-million-dollar study, is so incredibly simple, it almost sounds like a Hallmark card cliché. Until you realize it is backed by the most rigorous biological and psychological data ever collected. The researchers wanted to isolate the variables. They looked at the data when the men were 50 years old and asked, what specific metric at age 50 is the absolute best predictor of who will be physically healthy, cognitively sharp, and emotionally happy at age 80? Was it their peak earning years, their career prestige, the zip code they lived in, their cholesterol levels, or their blood pressure? It wasn't cholesterol, it wasn't money, it wasn't whether they went to Harvard or grew up in a tenement. The absolute strongest predictor of health and happiness at age 80 was how satisfied they were in their relationships at age 50, period, full stop. The quality of our connections dictates the quality of our lives, and we have to be clear here, this isn't just about feeling warm and fuzzy, it dictates our physical health. The neurobiological data shows that loneliness is a physiological toxin. When you are chronically isolated, your body remains in a low-grade state of fight or flight. Your cortisol levels stay elevated. That chronic stress causes systemic inflammation, which literally degrades your joints, accelerates arterial plaque buildup, and breaks down your brain tissue. Loneliness kills. The study concluded it is as toxic to your health as smoking half a pack of cigarettes a day or being a chronic alcoholic. Conversely, deep relationships act as a biological buffer against the slings and arrows of life. But let's pause here. If you are 40 or 50 years old, and you are currently feeling isolated, hearing that relationships predict your lifespan can induce massive anxiety. You might think, well, I don't have a spouse and I don't have 5 best friends from college, so I guess I'm doomed. It feels like an overwhelming mountain to climb. But the research and the practical application we see from people like Mel Robbins brings this down to a beautiful, manageable micro level. It doesn't require finding a soulmate tomorrow. It starts with something as small as a conversation at a coffee shop. Mel Robbins travels constantly for her speaking career. She's in different cities, staying in the same corporate hotels. There's a specific coffee shop in one of these hotels that she frequents, and she makes a conscious, deliberate choice to connect with the barista. She asks for his name. She finds out his name is Evan. Here is the behavioral detail she shares, which is so incredibly simple, but so highly effective. As soon as she gets her coffee from Evan, she turns around, pulls out her phone, opens her notes app, and creates a specific entry for that hotel. Under the hotel name, she types, Evan Barista. Why? Because 6 months later, when she is back in that city, jet-lagged and exhausted, she pulls up the note, walks up to the counter, looks him in the eye, and says, "Hey Evan, great to see you again." Now, to a cynic, that seems like a trivial, almost transactional interaction. I genuinely wanted to push back on this when I first came across it. Does remembering a barista's name really stave off the existential dread of human loneliness? How does a 10-second interaction about a latte change your neurobiology? Here's why it works. Human beings are deeply, neurobiologically wired for tribal belonging. The nervous system doesn't just categorize relationships into 2 rigid boxes of lifelong soulmate and complete stranger. It registers a vast spectrum of micro-connections. When you use someone's name, when you look them in the eye, and share a brief, genuine moment of recognition, you are stimulating the vagus nerve. Your nervous system registers a subtle but powerful cue of safety and belonging. It sends a message to your brain that says, I am seen, I am part of a community, I am woven into the fabric of humanity. These repeated micro-connections act as a cumulative buffer against the slow, creeping cortisol of isolation. It proves that the good life isn't some grand, finalized destination you arrive at when you retire to a beach. It is constructed actively in the present moment, through the people immediately in front of you. And staying anchored in that present moment is incredibly difficult when our default state is the anxiety-driven autopilot we talked about earlier. We are usually obsessing over the past or catastrophizing about the future. Dr. Waldinger provides a specific, accessible tool for this, a mindfulness exercise designed to literally force your brain into the present tense. The red light exercise. You don't need a meditation retreat. You are just sitting in your car at a red light. Keep your eyes open, obviously. But instead of reaching for your phone or raging at the traffic, you use those 30 seconds to intentionally break the autopilot. You feel your hands on the steering wheel. You feel the physical sensation of your heartbeat in your chest. You realize it's just ticking away, doing the work, supporting your life without you even asking it to. You consciously appreciate the breath going into your lungs and coming out. You notice the specific sounds of the city around you. In that tiny window at a traffic light, you anchor your nervous system back into reality. Because the present moment is the only place the good life can actually be lived. It is a profound synthesis of everything we've explored today. You must take absolute responsibility for the accuracy of your map, as Peck demands. You must bravely design your trajectory and run prototypes, as the Stanford professors teach. And you must ground yourself in the present moment through human connection, as the Harvard data proves. But there is one final, deeply mysterious variable in this entire equation, an element that defies the clean logic of everything we've just discussed. And to understand it, we have to return to the man who started this journey. We have to return to M. Scott Peck. We've spent this entire episode talking about rigid systems, engineering your life, taking absolute responsibility, tracking empirical data. But in the final sections of his work, Peck introduces a concept that throws a wrench into the entire machine. He introduces the concept of grace. And context is everything here. We have to remember who is making this claim. This isn't a mystic on a mountaintop. This is an Ivy League educated psychiatrist, a man of science, a doctor whose entire professional worldview was built on empirical evidence, clinical observation, and the strict predictable causality of human behavior. Yet he reaches the end of his profound analysis of the human condition and admits, with total humility, that he simply cannot account for everything. It is a stunning, paradigm-shifting admission from a man of science. Contrast Peck's conclusion with the arrogance of modern self-help culture. Today, the billion-dollar optimization industry treats human beings like predictable algorithms. They sell you the illusion of total control. They tell you that if you input variable A, wake up at 5 a.m., variable B, drink green juice, variable C, journal your goals, you are mathematically guaranteed to output variable D, wealth and happiness. It is a closed, sterile loop of cause and effect. But Peck sat in his clinic for decades. He looked at the vast complexity of his patients' lives. He looked at the world and he said, no, the math doesn't always add up. There's a force operating entirely outside of our control. There are serendipities. There are profound synchronicities. There are moments of unearned healing, sudden bursts of clarity, or miraculous opportunities that simply cannot be explained by mere human effort. He called this invisible force grace. He freely admitted he didn't understand the mechanics of it. He couldn't measure it in a lab, but as a clinician, he could not deny its existence. Now I have to be honest with you, I wrestled with this. If grace is this mysterious, powerful force operating completely outside of our control, doesn't that render everything else we've discussed totally useless? Why bother enduring the pain of updating your map, or meticulously planning an Odyssey plan, or running disciplined prototypes, if the ultimate variable in the universe is just going to do whatever it wants anyway? It feels like a scientific cop-out. It feels like throwing your hands up in defeat. But that is the natural logical friction of the concept. It is the fundamental paradox of the human experience. Peck argues that discipline and grace are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are deeply symbiotic. All the grueling work we've discussed, the truth-telling, the accountability, the prototyping, it does not create grace. You cannot manufacture a miracle. You cannot force serendipity. But what discipline does, what an accurate map does, is it prepares your mind to recognize grace, and it gives you the structural capacity to catch it when it arrives. Think of it like building a sail for a boat. You cannot control the wind. The wind is grace. It blows when and where it wants. But if you don't do the hard discipline work of sewing the canvas, hoisting the mast, and learning how to navigate, then when the wind finally does blow, it passes right over you. You go nowhere. That is the exact dynamic. There's been a fascinating debate about this very tension in psychology circles, where people have tried to reconcile Peck's ethereal concept of grace with the hyper-focused grit of books like David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me, or the systemic rigor of James Clear's Atomic Habits. The synthesis they arrived at was profound. Motivation is a chemical state. It is incredibly fickle. You cannot rely on it. But discipline, the relentless act of doing the unglamorous work day in and day out, is what puts you in the optimal position to take advantage of the opportunities that grace drops into your lap. Think about John and his corrupted map. If John continues to lie to himself about reality, his eyes are closed. When the opportunity of a lifetime presents itself, a new career, a sudden profound connection, he will be too blind, too defensive, or too unprepared to seize it. Grace will knock on the door, but the house will be a wreck. You do the agonizing work, not to become the master of the universe, but to be ready for what the universe offers. So let's step back and look at the ground we've covered today. We started in the trenches with the stark, unflinching psychiatric reality of Peck. Life is difficult. We learned that our first, most crucial duty as adults is to take absolute responsibility for our own maps of reality and to stop handing the keys of our growth to our parents, our bosses, or our circumstances. From there, we moved out of the clinic and into the design studio. We unpacked the empowering, highly practical architecture of the Stanford Odyssey Plan. We learned how to honestly interrogate the terrifying trajectory of our default paths. We learned how to unlock the prefrontal cortex and defeat panic by simulating the rug pull. And we gave ourselves permission to bypass the extrinsic traps of society, to dream without limits, before bringing those dreams back to earth through empirical, low-stakes prototypes. And we grounded all of that ambition in the ultimate scientific truth paid for by 86 years of rigorous Harvard data. The indisputable fact that a good life isn't measured by your bank account, your job title, or your status. It is measured entirely by the warmth, depth, and quality of your connections with the human beings right in front of you. And through all of this relentless effort, we maintain the profound humility to leave the door cracked open for the mystery of grace. Now, as we close, I want to speak directly to you, the person listening to this right now. Maybe you're in your car, or walking the dog, or sitting at your desk. Based on the overwhelming weight of the clinical data, the design frameworks, and the empirical science we've explored today, the overriding message is clear. You are entirely capable of creating this change. Do not let a temporary condition or moment of panic trick you into a permanent state of misery. The current path you are on is exactly that, current. It is not your permanent destination unless you consciously choose to leave the autopilot engaged. The machinery is running, but the power to turn the wheel, to update the map, is entirely yours. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you transition back into your day. Scott Peck identified a specific psychological profile he called the passive dependent personality. It is the tragedy of the person who simply waits for life to happen to them. They wait for someone else to make them happy. They wait for the perfect job to fall from the sky. Today, our entire culture is obsessed with this romantic idea of finding our passion. We talk about passion like it's a hidden treasure chest buried under a rock. And if we just search hard enough, if we just take enough personality quizzes, we'll magically discover it. It is an incredibly passive, entitled way to view the trajectory of your own life. It absolves you of the responsibility of creation. But what if passion isn't something you find at all? What if, based on every single clinical insight and scientific data point we've unpacked today, passion is something you build? What if it is constructed brick by heavy brick? Friction of discipline, through the agonizing courage to finally face down your own unfinished business. What if passion is forged through the humility of updating a corrupted map and the grace of staying open, curious, and deeply connected to the barista, the friend, or the spouse right in front of you? Life is difficult, that much is true, but the road less traveled isn't about finding an easier path. It's about finally doing the work to become strong enough to walk the one you were meant for. Until next time.